The October wind cut through Nolan Creed's black suit as he stood beside the open grave. 36 years old, and he'd never felt more alone despite the crowd of mourners surrounding him. His father's casket sat suspended over the dark earth, polished wood gleaming under the gray Oregon sky. Rory pressed against his leg, small fingers wrapped around Nolan's hand. The 5-year-old had been quiet all morning, too quiet for a boy who usually bounced off walls. Nolan squeezed his son's hand and tried to focus on Pastor Williams' words about eternal rest and God's plan. "We gather today to honor Rufus Creed," the pastor said, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "A man who served his country with distinction in Vietnam, who built a business with his own hands, who raised a fine son." Nolan's throat tightened. His father had been everything the pastor said and more. Rufus Creed never missed a day of work in 40 years, never raised his voice in anger, never broke a promise. The heart attack had come from nowhere. One day they were planning to expand the machine shop. The next day, Nolan was picking out caskets. The gathered crowd bowed their heads for prayer. Farmers and mechanics, neighbors and old army buddies, all united in grief for a good man gone too soon. Delaney stood on Nolan's other side, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She'd been a rock through all of this, handling the funeral arrangements while Nolan could barely function. "Our Father, who art in heaven," Pastor Williams began. That's when Rory tugged on Nolan's jacket and whispered, "Daddy, we shouldn't be here." Nolan looked down at his son's serious face. "What? Did you see Grandpa's neck?" The words hit Nolan like cold water. He glanced around, but everyone else had their eyes closed in prayer. "What about his neck, buddy?" Rory's blue eyes were wide and worried. It looked hurt. Nolan's pulse quickened. Kids noticed things adults missed. They saw the world without filters, without assumptions. "What do you mean hurt?" Like someone grabbed him real tight. The prayer ended, and people began filing past the casket for final goodbyes. Nolan waited until most of the crowd had moved on, then approached his father's body. Rufus looked peaceful, hands folded over his chest, wearing his best suit. The funeral director had done good work. Nolan glanced around. Delaney was talking to her sister near the cars. Pastor Williams was shaking hands with other mourners. No one was watching, but he reached into the casket and gently moved his father's collar aside. There it was. A thin line around Rufus's neck, barely visible, but definitely there. Not from any medical procedure or natural cause. Someone had put pressure on his father's throat. Nolan's hand shook as he adjusted the collar back into place. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Heart attack, the death certificate said. Natural causes. But Rory had seen what the adults had missed. "Daddy." Rory appeared beside him. "Is Grandpa okay?" Nolan picked up his son and held him tight. "He's at peace now, buddy. He's at peace." But Nolan knew he wouldn't be at peace until he understood what had really happened to his father. Sleep wouldn't come. Nolan lay in bed, listening to Delaney's steady breathing, staring at the ceiling as questions churned through his mind. The mark on his father's neck. Rory's innocent observation. The timing of the heart attack, the T3 in the morning. He gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. Delaney didn't stir. She'd taken one of her pills, said the stress of the funeral had given her a headache. Nolan pulled on jeans and a sweater, then walked across the yard to his father's workshop. The building sat dark and silent, tools waiting for hands that would never return. Rufus had built the place from the ground up, starting with basic metalwork and growing into custom machining for farms and factories across 3 counties. The key still hung where it always had, under the loose board by the door. Some things never changed in small towns. Inside, the familiar smells of metal shavings and cutting oil brought memories flooding back. Nolan learning to use a lathe at age 12. Working summers through high school. Coming back after his carpentry business struggled. Grateful his father always kept a place for him. Nolan turned on the overhead lights and looked around. Everything seemed normal. Tools in their proper places, work orders pinned to the bulletin board, his father's coffee mug still sitting by the drill press. But if someone had killed Rufus, there had to be a reason. Money, revenge, secrets. His father wasn't the type to make enemies, but 40 years in business meant dealing with all kinds of people. Nolan started searching methodically. Desk drawers revealed the usual paperwork, bills, invoices. The filing cabinet held customer records going back decades. Nothing suspicious. Then he remembered something from childhood. His father had shown him a hiding spot once, when Nolan was maybe 10 years old. Sometimes a man needs to keep important things safe, Rufus had said. Not for bad people, but from fire or flood, or just plain bad luck. The loose floorboard was near the back corner, under a workbench. Nolan moved tools aside and pried up the board with a screwdriver. In the space below sat a small metal tin, the kind that once held pipe tobacco. Inside the tin, a flash drive labeled, "If anything happens to me," in his father's careful handwriting. Nolan's mouth went dry. He pocketed the drive and replaced the floorboard, then hurried back to the house. In his home office, he plugged the drive into his laptop and waited for the files to load. 3 folders appeared. Will, photos, and letter. The will looked standard, leaving everything to Nolan. The photos showed various documents, bank statements, insurance papers. But it was the letter that made Nolan's blood run cold. "Nolan, if you're reading this, something bad has happened to me. I've been keeping an eye on things lately, and I'm worried about Delaney. She's been asking questions about my accounts, wanting to know about life insurance, and who gets what when I'm gone. Said she was just concerned about your future, but something felt wrong about it. Last week, she wanted me to change my will to include her as a beneficiary. Said it would help with taxes or some such nonsense. I told her no, that everything goes to you and Rory like it should. She didn't take it well that there's also a man she keeps texting. Saw her phone light up a dozen times during dinner last Sunday. When I asked who it was, she said work stuff, but she looked guilty as sin. Check the bank statements I photographed. Look at the insurance papers. And watch out for that man. She keeps in touch with that. I hope I'm wrong about all this. I hope you never see this letter. But if something happens to me, don't assume it was natural. Your old dad didn't get to 71 by ignoring his instincts. Be careful, son. Protect Rory. And remember, I love you both. Dad. Nolan read the letter 3 times, each pass making his stomach tighter. His father had suspected Delaney, had been watching her, had hidden evidence. He opened the photos folder and found images of bank statements, insurance documents, and phone records. One item jumped out immediately. A life insurance policy for $500,000, dated just 2 months ago. The beneficiary wasn't Nolan, it was Delaney. Morning came gray and cold. Nolan sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in front of him, studying the documents from his father's flash drive. Every piece of evidence pointed towards something unthinkable. Delaney came downstairs in a robe, looking tired but beautiful. She'd always been the prettier half of their marriage, turning heads when they walked into restaurants or church. Dark hair, green eyes, the kind of smile that made strangers trust her instantly. "You're up early," she said, starting the coffee maker. "Couldn't sleep?" Something like that. She sat across from him, studying his face. "The funeral was hard on all of us. It's normal to feel unsettled." Nolan closed the laptop and looked at his wife of 8 years. The woman who'd said yes when he proposed on the coast. Who'd cried happy tears when Rory was born. Who'd comforted him through his father's death. "Did you talk to Dad the day before he died?" Delaney blinked, her coffee cup pausing halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. Did you see him or talk to him that Tuesday? I was at my sister's house that whole day. You know that. We were planning the kids' Halloween party." The lie came so easily. No hesitation, no telltale flush or stumble. If Nolan hadn't seen the phone records showing calls between Delaney and his father that afternoon, he would have believed her completely. "Right?" he said. "I forgot." Delaney reached across the table and touched his hand. "Honey, you're grieving. It's normal for your mind to play tricks on you. Maybe you should talk to someone. Maybe." She kissed his forehead and went upstairs to shower. Nolan waited until he heard the water running, then went to her laptop in the living room. She never locked it, said she had nothing to hide. Tonight, after she fell asleep, he'd find out if that was true. The keylogger software took 5 minutes to install. Invisible to casual users, it would record every keystroke, every password, every website. If Delaney was hiding something, he'd find it. Rory wandered downstairs in his pajamas, hair sticking up in all directions. "Is Mommy making pancakes?" Not today, buddy. How about cereal? As Nolan poured milk over Cheerios, he watched his son's innocent face. Rory had spotted something wrong at the funeral that trained adults had missed. Kids saw the truth because they hadn't learned to look away from uncomfortable things yet. Daddy, why was Grandpa hurt? Nolan set down the milk carton. What makes you think he was hurt? His neck looked funny, and Mommy was crying, but not sad crying. Different crying. What do you mean, different crying? Rory scrunched up his face, thinking, like when I break something and don't want you to find out. Scared crying. Out of the mouths of babes. Nolan hugged his son tight, breathing in the smell of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. Whatever was happening, whatever Delaney had done, he'd protect Rory from it. Finish your cereal, buddy. We're going to spend the day together, just as guys. 3 days of keylogger data revealed Delaney's secret life. Encrypted messaging apps, deleted browser histories, and a name that appeared again and again. Connor Vexler. Nolan sat his truck outside the bank, reading transcripts on his phone. The messages were fragments, coded language that could mean anything to casual observers. But the pattern was clear. Delaney and this Connor had been planning something. Package is delivered. Old man won't be a problem anymore. When do we move on the accounts? Soon. Need to wait for things to settle. This better work. I didn't do all this for nothing. The timestamps showed the messages started 2 weeks before his father's death and continued right up to yesterday. Nolan's phone buzzed with a call from First National Bank. He'd requested copies of his father's financial records, using his status as executor of the estate. Mr. Creed, this is Janet Holbrook from the bank. I have those documents you requested, but I need to tell you something unusual. Someone else has been asking about your father's accounts. Who? Your wife came in last week with a power of attorney document. Said your father had given her authority to handle his finances due to his declining health. We didn't process it because the document looked questionable, but she was quite insistent. Declining health. Rufus had been sharp as a razor until the day he died. Do you still have a document? Yes, and I think you should see it. The signature doesn't match our records for your father. Nolan closed his eyes. I'll be right there. At the bank, Janet Holbrook spread the forged power of attorney across her desk. Even in Nolan's untrained eye, the signature looked wrong. Too smooth, too practiced. His father's real signature had a distinctive shake from an old hand injury. There's something else, Janet said. 2 months ago, someone set up a new life insurance policy on your father's account. Paid the first premium with a cashier's check. The policy was handled online, and the signature was digital. Who's the beneficiary? Your wife. Nolan stared at the paperwork. $500,000, payable to Delaney upon Rufus Creed's death. His father would never have agreed to such a thing. Would never have excluded Nolan from a policy that size. I need copies of everything, Nolan said. And I need to know if anyone has tried to file a claim yet. No claims so far. But Mr. Creed, if you suspect fraud, I'll handle it. Outside the bank, Nolan called Officer Silas McKean. They'd grown up together, played football in high school before Silas joined the Army, and Nolan learned carpentry. Silas had been at the funeral, had served with Rufus in Vietnam 2 decades apart, but in the same brotherhood. Silas, I need to talk to you. Privately. About my dad. What about him? I don't think he died naturally. Silence stretched across the phone line. Then, meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour. And Nolan? Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Murphy's Diner sat on the edge of town, the kind of place where coffee was strong and conversation stayed private. Silas McKean waited in a back booth, still in uniform but off-duty. 15 years of police work had carved lines around his eyes, but his handshake was firm as ever. Talk to me, Silas said without preamble. Nolan spread the evidence across the table. The forged power of attorney, the insurance policy, printouts of the encrypted messages. He explained about Rory noticing the mark on Rufus's neck, about finding the flash drive, about Delaney's lies. Silas studied everything with cop eyes, asking sharp questions. You're sure about the timeline on these messages? Positive. The keylogger stamps everything. And this Connor Vexler, you have no idea who he is. Never heard the name before last week. Silas made notes on a small pad. I'll run him through the system, see what comes up. As for your father's death, the coroner ruled it cardiac arrest. No autopsy was performed because it seemed straightforward. Can we get one now? Body's been cremated. Delaney signed the authorization 2 days after the funeral. Of course she had. Nolan felt the trap closing around his father's death. Evidence disappearing before anyone knew to look for it. There's one more thing, Silas said. The funeral home disposed of tissue samples early. Usually they keep them for 30 days, but your wife requested immediate disposal. Said the family wanted closure. She what? Paid extra for expedited handling. Everything's gone, Nolan. If your father was murdered, the physical evidence is destroyed. Nolan stared at his coffee, watching steam rise from the dark surface. Delaney had covered her tracks perfectly, or almost perfectly. What about the messages? The insurance fraud. Messages could be about anything without context. Insurance fraud is trickier to prove if the death looks natural. We need more than forged documents. Like what? A confession would be nice. After Silas left, Nolan sat in the diner parking lot and called Cass Murphy, the woman who owned the bar on Main Street. They'd been friends since high school, and Cass had a talent for getting information out of people. Something about tending bar for 20 years taught you how to read human nature. I need a favor, Nolan said when she answered. Name it. Remember Connor Vexlow? Used to date around town before I moved back. Con man Connor? Yeah, I remember him. Slick talker, nice car, always had money but no visible job. What? He's back. I need to know what he's up to. This about your dad? Nolan had forgotten how sharp Cass was. Maybe. Give me a day or two. I'll see what I can find out. Connor Vexler had a record. Silas called Thursday morning with the details. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. 3 years in state prison, released 6 months ago. Last known address was a motel outside Bend, but the trail went cold after that. Guy's a professional con artist, Silas said. Specializes in insurance scams and inheritance fraud. Perfect skill set for what you're describing. Any connection to Delaney? Working on it. But Nolan, if we're right about this, you need to be careful. These people have already killed once. That evening, Cass called with news. Found your boy Connor. He's been staying at the Riverside Motel, room 12. Drives a black Honda. Likes to drink at Hannigan's bar on the other side of town. Thanks, Cass. Nolan, whatever you're planning, don't do it alone. But Cass had her own plans. She'd been thinking about the problem all day, and bartenders knew how to handle drunk men who talked too much. Friday night, Cass walked into Hannigan's wearing a tight dress and her best smile. Connor Vexler sat at the end of the bar, just like her sources said he would. 40-something, decent-looking in a used car salesman way, nursing a whiskey and scrolling through his phone. Cass ordered a drink and struck up a conversation. Connor responded like most men did, eager to impress a pretty woman who showed interest. 3 drinks later, he was bragging about his latest business venture. Got something big cooking, he said, leaning close enough that Cass could smell the liquor on his breath. Partnership with a local woman. Rich widow soon, if you know what I mean. Sound exciting. Cass kept her voice light, flirtatious. What kind of business? Connor pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Delaney Creed smiled from the screen, beautiful and innocent looking. Insurance game, Connor said. Her old man croaked a couple weeks back. Heart attack. Real convenient timing, if you ask me. Cass's blood went cold, but she kept smiling. Lucky break. Luck had nothing to do with it. Connor finished his drink and signaled for another. I helped her set the whole thing up. Once that old bastard croaked, it was all supposed to roll in. $500,000 in life insurance, plus whatever he had in the bank. The bartender was busy with other customers. The bar was loud enough that their conversation was private. Cass made sure her phone was recording everything. How'd you help? Connor grinned, the alcohol making him sloppy. Let's just say the heart attack wasn't as natural as everyone thinks. Woman's got a talent for pressure points, if you know what I mean. You mean she didn't leave a mark? Well, barely left a mark. Used a pillow to finish the job while I kept watch outside. Clean and simple. Cass felt sick, but she kept the conversation going. Got Connor to describe the plan in detail. How they'd researched Rufus's habits. How Delaney had convinced him to let her visit that Tuesday afternoon. How she'd waited for the right moment. He didn't go quietly, Connor said, his voice getting louder as the alcohol hit him. grabbed her wrist when she pressed down. She thought he'd scream, but old bastard couldn't get enough air. 20 minutes later, Cass had enough evidence to destroy both of them. She excused herself to the bathroom and immediately called Nolan. "I got him," she said. "Everything." He confessed to the whole thing. Saturday morning brought rain and the weight of terrible knowledge. Nolan sat in the district attorney's office with Silas McKean and assistant DA Patricia Wells. Listening to Cass's recording for the third time, Connor's voice filled the room, bragging about murder with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Delaney's involvement was clear, damning, and recorded in digital clarity. "This is strong evidence," Wells said, "but it's not enough for a conviction on its own. We need corroboration, physical evidence, or additional confessions." "What about the insurance fraud?" Nolan asked. "That's prosecutable, but it's white-collar crime. Even if we get convictions, they might only serve a few years. For murder, we need more." Silas leaned forward. "What if we could get them to confess on tape? In a controlled environment? You mean a sting operation?" "Exactly. Make them think they're safe, get them talking about what they did." Wells considered this. "It's risky. If they suspect anything, they'll lawyer up and we'll lose our chance. But if it works, life sentences," Nolan said. The plan took shape over the next hour. Nolan would tell Delaney that he discovered his father's will have been changed, that he now controlled all the money and property. The lie would panic her, force her to contact Connor and figure out their next move. "We'll wire your house," Silas said. "Audio and video surveillance. When they meet to discuss the problem, we'll have everything on record. What about Rory? He'll stay with Cass for the weekend. Keep him safe and out of the way." Wells reviewed the legal requirements. "We need warrants for the surveillance, but Judge Morrison will sign them based on the evidence. This has to be done by the book if we want convictions." Nolan drove home through the rain, rehearsing his lines. He'd been married to Delaney for 8 years, thought he knew her completely. Now he had to pretend everything was normal while setting a trap for the woman who'd murdered his father. Sunday afternoon, with Rory safely at Cass's apartment, Nolan confronted his wife. Delaney was folding laundry in the bedroom, humming softly to herself. She looked up when he entered, smiling the same smile that had captivated him 9 years ago. "I found something today," Nolan said, keeping his voice steady. "About Dad's will." Her hand stilled on a shirt. "What do you mean?" "He changed it recently. Made me the sole beneficiary of everything. The bank accounts, the shop, all of it." Delaney's face went white. "That's impossible. The will we saw said..." "Said what, Delaney?" She caught herself, but too late. "I just thought. I assumed he would have provided for Rory's future too." "He did. Through me. But here's the interesting part." Nolan pulled out a folder with fake documents Silas had prepared. "There's also a clause about life insurance policies. Any policies taken out in the last year become void if there's evidence of fraud." Delaney's hands shook as she reached for the papers. "Let me see that. The bank is reviewing all recent transactions. They found some irregularities in Dad's accounts. Might take weeks to sort out." "What kind of irregularities?" "Forged signatures. Unauthorized policy changes. The kind of thing that gets people arrested." Delaney sank onto the bed, all color drained from her face. "Nolan, I need to tell you something." For a moment, he thought she might confess everything, in the charade, and admit what she'd done. Instead, she said, "I need some air. I'm going for a drive." "Sure. Take your time." After she left, Nolan called Silas. "She's panicking. She'll be making contact soon. We're ready. Surveillance team is in position." Delaney returned 2 hours later with groceries and a forced smile. "Thought I'd make your favorite dinner tonight. Pot roast with potatoes. Sounds great. I need to run some errands anyway. Give you time to cook." Nolan drove to the motel, where Silas waited in an unmarked car. "Anything." She made 4 phone calls from the grocery store parking lot, all to the same number, registered to Connor Vexler. Last call lasted 15 minutes. "Think he'll come. Bank on it. They're in too deep to back out now." Nolan returned home at sunset to find Delaney in the kitchen, moving with nervous energy. Dinner was ready, the table set with their good dishes. "You went to a lot of trouble," he said. "We should spend more time together." Quality time. They ate in relative silence, making small talk about Rory's school, and the weather. Delaney checked her phone repeatedly, jumping at every sound from outside. At 8 o'clock, Nolan announced he was going to bed early. All this stress is wearing me out. Good idea. I'll clean up down here. Instead of going upstairs, Nolan slipped out the back door and met Silas in the garage. The surveillance equipment was hidden throughout the house. Cameras and light fixtures, microphones and picture frames, recording devices and children's toys scattered around the living room. They'll never spot the equipment, Silas assured him. We've done this before. At 9:15, a black Honda pulled into the driveway. Connor Vexler looked exactly like Cass had described. Medium height, slick back hair, wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days. He knocked softly on the front door. Through their headphones, Nolan and Silas heard Delaney let him in. What the hell is going on? Connor's voice was tense, angry. You said this was all worked out. Sit down. Keep your voice low. They moved to the kitchen, directly under one of the hidden cameras. The video feed showed Connor pacing while Delaney wrung her hands. The will was changed, Delaney said. Nolan gets everything. And there's something about fraud investigations. You said the will was rewritten. I thought you said we were in the clear. I thought we were. But there's more. The bank is asking questions about the insurance policy. They think the signature was forged. Connor stopped pacing. How much do they know? I don't know. Nolan showed me some papers, but I couldn't read them all. He's suspicious about something. We need to get those documents. Figure out exactly what he knows. And then what? Connor was quiet for a long moment, thinking. We torch the shop. Make it look like an electrical fire. Destroy any evidence your father-in-law might have hidden. What about Nolan? What about him? Delaney's voice dropped to a whisper. He's asking questions. Getting too close. Then we handle him the same way we handled the old man. In the garage, Nolan's hands clenched into fists. Silas put a restraining hand on his arm. Let them talk, Silas whispered. We need everything on record. The conversation continued for another hour. Connor and Delaney discussed their original plan in detail. How they'd researched Rufus's daily routine. How Delaney had convinced him to let her visit that Tuesday. How she'd waited until he was relaxed before making her move. He didn't go quietly, Delaney said, her voice hollow. He grabbed my wrist. I thought he'd scream, but he didn't. You held that pillow down until he stopped moving, just like we practiced. I know. I never thought it would feel like that. Feel like what? Like murder. Connor laughed. A cold sound without humor. That's exactly what it was, sweetheart. And if we want to keep the money, we might have to do it again. At 6 a.m. Monday morning, a SWAT team surrounded the house. Nolan had spent the night at Silas's place, listening to audio recordings and preparing for what came next. Delaney was still asleep when officers broke down the front door. She woke to find assault rifles pointed at her face and handcuffs clicking around her wrists. Connor tried to run when they kicked in his motel room door. Made it 50 yards across the parking lot before a taser dropped him to the asphalt. Both suspects were processed at the county jail within an hour. By noon, the district attorney had filed charges. Murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, and tampering with evidence. Nolan stood in the courthouse hallway, watching through reinforced glass as his wife sat in an orange jumpsuit, talking to a court-appointed lawyer. 8 years of marriage, and he'd never really known her at all. Silas appeared beside him. How you holding up? I keep thinking about the last 8 years. Every conversation, every moment of affection. Was any of it real? Does it matter now? I guess not. The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. Both defendants would be held without bail, given the flight risk and severity of charges. What happens to Rory? Nolan asked. That's up to you. As far as the law is concerned, you're his father. Delaney can't exactly request custody from prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Small-town murders made big news, especially when they involved insurance fraud and family betrayal. Nolan pushed through the crowd without comment, climbed into his truck, and drove home to an empty house. The trial began 3 months later. District Attorney Wells had assembled an overwhelming case. The surveillance recordings, Connor's drunken confession to Cass, the forged insurance documents, phone records showing contact between the defendants, and expert testimony about the ligature marks on Rufus's neck that Delaney's lawyer tried to paint her as an abused wife, manipulated by Connor into a scheme she didn't understand. The defense claimed she'd been coerced, that Connor had threatened her and Rory if she didn't cooperate. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense attorney said in his opening statement, "My client is a victim here. A woman terrorized by a career criminal who saw an opportunity to exploit a grieving family." But the surveillance recordings destroyed that narrative. Delaney's voice was clear and calm as she discussed murdering Rufus, showed no signs of fear or coercion. When Connor suggested killing Nolan too, she didn't object or resist. She asked practical questions about timing and methods. Cass testified about Connor's confession, playing the recording for the jury. Connor's bragging voice filled the courtroom, describing murder with casual pride. He didn't go quietly. The recording played. Grabbed her wrist when she pressed down. She thought he'd scream, but old bastard couldn't get enough air. Several jurors looked sick. One older woman dabbed tears from her eyes. The medical examiner testified about the ligature marks, explaining how pressure applied to the neck could cause cardiac arrest without leaving obvious signs of violence. "In my opinion," she said, "Mr. Creed was manually strangled until he lost consciousness, then smothered with a pillow or similar object. The heart attack was a secondary cause of death, brought on by oxygen deprivation." Connor's lawyer tried to discredit the confession, claiming he'd been drunk and bragging to impress a woman. But the physical evidence supported every detail he'd described out on the fourth day of trial. Nolan took the stand. He testified about finding the flash drive, about his father's suspicions, about discovering the forged insurance policy that Delaney's lawyer cross-examined him aggressively, trying to suggest that grief had clouded his judgment, that he was seeing conspiracy where none existed. "Mr. Creed, isn't it possible you've misinterpreted innocent actions as evidence of guilt?" "No," Nolan said firmly. "My wife murdered my father for money. The evidence proves it. But you loved your wife, didn't you? This must be devastating for you." "I love the woman I thought she was. I have no feelings for the killer sitting at that table." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdicts. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. Delaney showed no emotion as the words were read. She'd maintained her innocence throughout the trial, claiming the surveillance recordings had been manipulated, that Connor had acted alone. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without possibility of parole. Connor received the same sentence, plus additional years for his prior convictions. As the bailiff led her away in shackles, Delaney looked back at Nolan one last time. Her green eyes held no remorse, no apology, only cold calculation, as if she was still trying to figure out where the plan had gone wrong. 6 months after the trial, Nolan stood in the rebuilt workshop with Rory beside him. They'd spent the summer renovating, updating equipment, and designing new signage. The building felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if removing the shadow of murder had let light back in. "Can we hang Grandpa's picture now?" Rory asked. "Of course, buddy." They'd found the perfect spot on the wall near the front desk, where customers would see it first thing. Rufus Creed smiled from the frame, wearing his work clothes and the satisfied expression of a man who'd built something lasting. Rory climbed on a chair and hung the photo carefully, making sure it was straight. Below it, a smaller frame held the new business license, Creed and Son Machining. "Do you think Grandpa would like it?" Rory asked. "I think he'd be proud." The business was doing well. Word had spread about the quality of their work, and orders were coming in from across the state. Nolan had hired 2 part-time employees and was considering expansion. But more importantly, Rory was thriving. The trauma of losing his grandfather and learning about his mother's crimes had been difficult, but kids were resilient. With help from a good therapist and lots of support from Nolan and Cass, he was healing. "Daddy, do you miss Mommy?" It was a question Rory asked sometimes, usually when he was feeling thoughtful. Nolan had learned to answer honestly, but carefully. "I miss the mommy I thought you had. But the real person who lived with us did bad things. Sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be. But you're really my daddy, right? Forever and always, buddy. Nothing will ever change that." They walked outside into the Oregon afternoon. The hills rolled away in all directions, covered with the deep green of Douglas fir and the gold of autumn maples. It was the kind of view his father had loved, the kind of peace he'd worked his whole life to earn. That Nolan's phone buzzed with a text from Cass. "Dinner ready when you are." Made Rory's favorite. "Come on," Nolan said, taking his son's hand. "Let's go home." As they walked toward the truck, Rory looked back at the workshop one more time. "Daddy, I think Grandpa's watching out for us." "Why do you say that?" "Because the bad people got caught, and we're safe now." Nolan squeezed his son's hand. "You're right, buddy. We're safe now." The truck pulled away from Creed and Son Machining, carrying them down the hill toward town, toward dinner with friends, toward a future built on truth instead of lies. Behind them, the workshop stood quiet and strong, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. In the end, justice had prevailed. Love had survived, and a good man's legacy lived on in the hands of his son and grandson, just as it should be.